Welcome back everyone to Gotcha Interact. Today we're going to be talking about the 4 stars on the banners. Now we already did make it to pull or not to pull, talking about other things about obviously these banners in the past, talking about the to pull or not to pull. We even talked about the characters, specifically the newer ones that we have here. But really when we want to talk about today is going to be the 4 stars that just came out for the video. For actually looking on this video, we're going to be talking about the 4 stars. So if you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Also check out our Discord as well. But let's go ahead and jump ahead and talk about these 4 stars characters. So Rift, what are your kind of thoughts first and foremost on these? Because they're very interesting, that's for sure.
Interesting is definitely one word to describe it. I'm going to start with kind of the quote fodder of the banner in terms of 4 stars and just getting Barbara out of the way. Now, this isn't to say she's a bad character by any means. She has a use. What I use her for is a Bloom team with Nilou, Nahida, and there's several different variants that you can do. She still has a pretty good use for that, so I've built her like with full EM, use sacrificial fragments. It works very well because she's also the healer for the team, being on field using her skill, allowing her to heal everyone at the same time. It's actually a very comfortable team and has cleared Abyss for me even just because of the synergy there. But outside of that, Barbara finds a really hard time to just really be inserted into a team and have a really good value or synergy with it to clear maybe harder content. Now, that aside, she's an amazing healer, even for a 4 star. She is a very good, dedicated healer. So for overworld stuff and really anything that's not Abyss, even event gameplay, maybe even Imaginary Theater, she still actually does her job very well being a healer. It's just when it comes to Hydro application or supporting other characters, it's a little bit lackluster. So she's really just a healer, and she only works in the Bloom team as an on-fielder really well just because if she's on field, she's actually applying Hydro. But if she's off field, it's very minimal application. So Vixen, what are some of your thoughts maybe on Barbara?
I would have to totally agree. I think outside of the Bloom team, really for end game content and really looking at it in that way, that's really all she really brings to the table. I would say what she can do, and this is really pushing it, when we're looking at the 4 star like this, that she could be used because she does, follow the character around with her healing. Considering you just kind of create a ring around the character, the active character, it does allow for healing to be beyond the normal scope, as well as with the C6, it offers a free revive, I think. So, that's kind of the idea, I think, overall with her. Besides that, like you said, there's not really much to really talk about her. Good character, and I am so thankful to her as a beginning character. Barbara was the reason that I did well at the beginning of this game, so much thanks, but your time is done for probably most characters and most players, at least in most teams.
Unfortunately.
But yeah, so let's go ahead and look at the next character, which arguably could also be fodder. For me, that is an easy fodder piece. I have a love-hate relationship with Sucrose. Sucrose is a good character, but my qualm with her is almost that other characters can just do the same job. Characters like Venti, Jean, and Kazuha, just to talk about some 5-star characters. Characters like Jean is someone hopefully that you would have gotten hopefully at some point if she's a really good healer and she could create Viridescent for you. And that's kind of what I feel like Sucrose kind of is there for, mainly is the Viridescent use. And the same thing could be said about Kazuha as well. And he just gives, the elemental damage bonus on top of it with some damage. Then you've got Venti, who does Viridescent but brings a lot of damage and grouping on top of that. And I already talked about Jean being a really solid healer. So it feels like almost, obviously because she is a 4 star, it just feels like even with Constellation, Sucrose can feel and fall a little bit short to those characters.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's because of these other characters that Sucrose's value over the years has started to dwindle almost into nothingness, and especially now that, well, really ever since Fontaine, the beginning, Lynette was offered as a free character and still is to new players that play through it. They still get a free copy of Lynette. And so just that being offered as a good off-fielder who can use Viridescent, to look at Sucrose's value as a gacha only character kind of pulls away from that just because Lynette's free. And then you just have these other supports in the game that are still S tier like Kazuha that are just going to do the job better. The only takeaway with Sucrose that I still, to this day, she actually still has this unique thing that she does in terms of the Animo support roster that is unique to her and her alone, and that is giving elemental mastery. Other supports give something different. For Kazuha, it's the damage bonus. Venti, it's just the massively insane crowd control that Kazuha has a little bit of. Jean's healing. Lynette gives a little bit of an attack bonus, etc. For Sucrose, it's giving elemental mastery. And so for certain teams that really like elemental mastery and get a massive benefit from something like that stat, Sucrose feels really good actually, and quite competitive with Kazuha even, depending on those teams. If they're teams like Sino Aggravate, Sino really likes the EM buff because Sucrose actually can give a comparable EM buff to that of someone like Nahida. She can actually give 250 elemental mastery because she has a passive that gives 50 to the element she swirls, which in that case of Sino would be Electro. So you get the Electro Swirl, but then she can also give up to 200 on the other passive based on 20% of her elemental mastery. So if you have 1000 EM on Sucrose, which yes is kind of a big ask, but not impossible, then your Sucrose is giving just as much EM as the Dendro Archon. And so for certain teams that are using Dendro, even catching Aggravate can really use Sucrose for both the Viridescent Shred, but also the EM buff. Can feel pretty good, and even some other teams that just want EM in general, it's gonna feel good. So it's kind of niche, but she still has that kind of placement and that utility. If you don't have these other S tier, 5-star Animo supports, and Sucrose is your only option, you do happen to get her, she still does her job really well. She can be thrown into a team that can clear Abyss 12-3 and all the other chambers with it. So she can still clear the content, but there are just better options, and that's just kind of where I sit with Sucrose.
Yeah, looking at both those two characters, they kind of sit on very niche specific ideas and teams, but let's go ahead and look a little bit beyond those characters and talk about the next character, Auroron. Looking at Auroron, if you guys don't know too much about him already, you guys can go ahead and check out the video we made about him pretty recently, just going over his kit as he's going to be releasing very soon. So Rift, what are your personal thoughts? Because I definitely have some good positive thoughts about him, but at the same time, some concerns as well.
Well, for those of you who didn't watch our latest video, the video before this, talking about Auroron, in short, he's kind of just selfish. He's a damage dealer, and I think the closest other character to compare him to, sort of, it would be Fischl, just because they're both characters that are a little bit focused on just dealing damage from off field. They don't actually provide any real buffs to the other teammates, their main DPS. They're just helping supplement with damage. It's more just supportive damage, and that's what makes them good. Fischl's always been good, even though she doesn't give anything crazy. She's just a really good damage dealer, and I feel like that's what Auroron's going to be. The little cherry on top, though, that I think Auroron has over Fischl is that, number one, he is a Natlan character, so he can take use of the scroll set and probably even buff not just Natlan characters with using the scroll set, but pre-existing Natlan characters and future Natlan characters, because we have seen in some kits that Natlan characters want other Natlan characters to decrease the Night Soul burst activation cooldown from, the 18 seconds to 12, then to 9 based on how many Natlan characters you have. And so Auroron being able to satisfy that can open up some interesting new teams for some of these other Natlan characters. And I think Chasca is a good example of a character that may actually really like Auroron. But Vixen, what are some of your thoughts? I know you said you had something.
Well, yeah, actually, when we talked about this before the recording, I had brought up the scroll set to you, and alongside of that, actually, I think the other positive thing that he can do is the energy that he can give. Now, I know it's very small and it's not a lot, but he also does have a little bit of a support in him. So although he is a kind of more built as a sub DPS kind of character where he's focused on damage, unlike Fischl, like you were talking about, he does have mainly that scroll set that I was kind of bringing forward, but also he has the idea of giving some energy back to himself as well as to other party members, the on-fielders specifically. So I think that it can be pretty helpful to them, especially if they are kind of burst heavy as well. Also, though, just in general, I think Auroron's going to be a pretty good and fun character. He's kind of focused on Electro Charge, so I think we're going to see some pretty fun and interesting teams surrounding him. Overall, looking at the banner, though, I think I would just have to say that overall, these 4 stars just devalue the banner. Now, you have to remember, we're not just looking at Chasca here. We're also talking about someone like Lyney. Lyney, if I really have to just go through each one, Auroron technically can be used. Lyney likes to have 3 characters in the party, the mono pyro idea. With 3 pyro characters, usually you throw in a shielder like Zhongli, or you throw in a Viridescent user, but I know in occasion it can be thrown in with someone like Auroron here, an Electro character, to create the overload. Put Bennett and Chevreuse in the team as well. You still get a lot of the buffs that Lyney gives himself, plus the buffs that Chevreuse can give, creating the overload and whatnot. That's all the good stuff that she can do. I see that. I wouldn't say it's necessarily extremely cracked, but I do think that is a very solid team. The mono pyro though does still work, and I think that's why Sucrose can still work in this fight. Now, I know that there's, he works on that mono pyro team, and I know, like you were talking about, the EM kind of messes around with things, so I'm sure, Rift, if you want to kind of actually talk about this, I'm sure you could play some interesting teams with that. But Barbara, on the other hand, just kind of is borderline useless, in my personal opinion, on this team. I know she can be the healer for the team. Early game, that can be helpful. Chasca, I think Barbara can be somewhat useful, maybe difficult to kind of use to a full extent, but I think allowing her and Auron on the same team with Chasca can allow an electro charge, which can help Auron, as well as give a lot of extra help to, obviously, Chasca as a different character. Sucrose, though, is basically useless on this team, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to just sum it up really quickly, the way you talked about those characters. I feel basically the same way. I feel like Auron's going to be pretty nice with Chasca just because they're both Nightland characters. You're going to see that synergy there with the Night Soul bursts, but also doing, due to, Chasca's flexibility and being able to just really mix in kind of any soup team with the core elements. That means you can do an Electro Charge team, and Auron can be one of those off-field sub-DPS type characters that just makes the team feel really complete and probably just really fun. You could throw Farina in there. Obviously, you said the Barbara. I don't see why that would be an issue, especially for a newer player. Definitely throw Barbara in there if you also just need the heals and she's your only healer. She's going to get the job done. Just quick swap her with the burst. There's a lot of different things you do. And yeah, Sucrose is a little bit useless just because Chasca, she's already, doing her job and mixing all the different elements. You don't really need Sucrose in there. So you do better by doing a different character, maybe one of the core 4 elements to help Chasca out even more. So I would definitely agree. And then looking at Lyney, I think the Auron thing is actually a pretty interesting idea. I think it's if you're going to do Overload Lyney and you happen to have Chevreuse, but don't have a lot of Electro options, I think Fischl would still be better just because she doesn't need the Electro Charge thing. I think Auron isn't terrible, but he might be losing his full potential just because it's not Electro Charge, but he will be doing some damage. But I just think Fischl, might be a little bit better, or simply just another option. But if you don't have another Electro character that can do some damage from off field, I don't see why you can't use Auron there. Using Barbara with Lyney, like you said, pretty useless. I mean, you already have Bennett in the team, most likely. Best support for Lyney because he is the healer in the team already, so why should you need another? So that's how I feel about that. And then Sucrose, yes, can be used for Lyney. The only thing you're getting is a Viridescent Shred. That's pretty much it. The EM is not really helping you unless you are trying to do a Vaporize team, maybe with Farina. If you're going for that, then yeah, the EM actually can help the charge attacks for the Vaporize damage. So there you go, but that's really it.
Yeah, like you said, I'm glad you brought up that last point, because I know the Vaporize for Lyney's can be something that people do. So I think it'll be very interesting for what people can get across. But, I mean, I think that's everything we really have to say about these 4 stars. If you guys disagree with us, or if you agree with us and think that these 4 stars are just as bad as what happened on the Shilonen banner, go ahead and let us know down in the comments. Also, if you guys liked the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Check out the Discord as well. Thank you guys for watching the video, though, and we'll see you guys in the next one.